In this video, I'm going to talk about low back hyperextension at the top of your deadlift and what to do about it if you are experiencing pain from this particular movement. So first off, let's define what hyperextension at the top of a deadlift is. So imagine here, I am locking out my deadlift. Now, ideally, to spread all of the work of deadlifting around my body in the most even way possible, I would lock out like this, where you see my shoulders are stacked over my hips, stacked over my knees. And in terms of muscle activity, my abs are engaged so that they can balance out the tension in my low back. See, this is what would be ideal. Now, with a hyperextended low back, things look more like this. You see the difference there? See how my ribs are now leading the forward movement as opposed to my hips? And do you see how when I lead with my ribs, I'm extending my low back a lot more compared to if I led with my hips? See that? Here's my ribs again. And here's leading with my hips. So it's not that hyperextending your low back is guaranteed to lead to pain. It's that locking out your deadlift like this will inherently stress your low back a lot more than locking out like this will stress your low back. And any time that a body part is chronically stressed more than it's able to recover from, that's when you get an injury. So theoretically, you could go your whole life lifting heavy with a hyperextended lockout, so long as you recover properly from that manner of moving. But if you're in a spot where you already have pain associated with that particular movement of hyperextending your low back, then I would argue it would be more wise to somehow give your body a break from that hyperextension movement and learn a different way of moving so that in the future you won't have to always default to locking out your deadlifts like this. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the first way is just to try to cue yourself different things in your deadlift. Okay, as I just showed earlier in this video, a hyperextended low back lockout will involve a lot of rib thrusting. You see that? See how I just thrust my ribs? So one cue that you could use is focus on the hips more. Drive the hips forward. Right? Make sure that you're tilting your pelvis back like this to finish your lockout, rather than keeping your pelvis tilted forward and then trying to finish like this. Does that make sense? Now, if this cue isn't enough to change the way you lock out your deadlift, then you might want to isolate that skill using different exercises. For instance, the glute bridge. I'm sure that you've seen this exercise before if you've been around the strength training world, the glute bridge. But the magic here is not just in the exercise and then doing however many sets of reps that you're prescribed. The magic is in how you do it. Okay, check it out. Here's me glute bridging by hyperextending my low back and leading with my ribs. See that? I'm driving up with my ribs. Now here, I'm gonna lead with my hips. You see the difference? And what I should be feeling here is some very light ab tension, just to keep my pelvis and my rib cage synced up. And then I'm only going up as high as I can maintain that sinking of the pelvis and the rib cage. See that? I'm not going like this and then this. I'm just going here, boom, that's it. And the better that you get at sensing where that stopping point is, the better that you'll be able to lock out your deadlifts without relying so much on hyperextending your low back to do so. And one more thing to note there is that as you are getting better at deadlifting, finishing your deadlift without hyperextending your low back, as you're pursuing that, you have to keep the weight low enough so that you don't start defaulting back to your old habits. Because in a deadlift, you are asking your body to complete the task of picking the weight up from point A and standing up with it to point B. And if you go with the super heavy weight, if you go with the heaviest weight that you can possibly lift from point A to point B, then in that moment, your body is just going to go with the movement strategy that it's most used to, or that it feels is most capable of accomplishing that task that you put it to. And if you're still getting used to locking out with a non-hyperextended low back, then your body, every time that you go past a certain weight, it's just going to go back to its old habits. So this is a very long-winded way of saying, drop your ego. If you're trying to learn a new way of moving, you will have to accept that you won't be able to lift as much weight with that new way of moving until you're more experienced with that new way. So to review, why does low back pain occur with hyperextending the low back? It's not because hyperextending the low back is inherently harmful, but that it does inherently stress your low back more than locking out with a non-hyperextended low back does. And whenever a body part is chronically stressed more than it can handle, more than it can recover from, that is when an injury occurs. So to give your low back a break from the stress of locking out your deadlifts with a hyperextended low back, you've got to learn a new way of locking out your deadlifts. And you can do that via changing up the cues in which you use the deadlift. And if that doesn't work, then you can isolate that skill using different exercises such as the glute bridge, which you then progress back to your regular deadlift, only sticking with the weights that you can lift with that new way of deadlifting, and you progress that over time until that becomes just as strong as your old way of locking out your deadlifts. And that's the video. If you found it useful, please give it a like. Please share it with anyone else who may also find it helpful. I know that this particular issue is very common in the strength training world. And if you've got any questions about what I've covered, please do not hesitate to leave a comment below. And if you'd like more content on squats and deadlifts and how to get back to doing them pain-free, I invite you to subscribe. Cheers.